All right, hope everyone's doing good at home. We are finally getting back to track on things, and hopefully we're going to move through the semester relatively well. I'm going to try out these videos for the next few weeks. Maybe I'll try and get fancy with them and add some PowerPoints and stuff to them, but I'm still trying to figure all that out. Never really done any lectures from home. But we'll make do. We'll do the best we can. I hope everyone's doing good throughout all this COVID-19 issues that we have going on, and hopefully you guys are staying safe and can't wait to get back on campus. Okay, a few important announcements to make is bear with me as we go through each semester and each lab. I'm going to try and get all the lab assignments done. If you'll notice, some are already completed, like the heart assignment and the heart module, and then so on and so forth. Canvas is going to look a little bit different now that we're moving all to or 100% online. So as we move forward, things may change, and I'm going to try and get the new syllabus out to you ASAP. There's a lot of work that is being done right now to try and convert all our classes from face-to-face to online, so just bear with. As always, email me. If you're late on an assignment or if you get sick or something like that, just shoot me an email. We're all adults. It's no problem. We'll figure it out. The last time we met, we went over upper body. And so what we're going to do today, I was able to get at least one skeleton model from the lab. So we'll briefly go over some of the upper body stuff. I think we missed some of the muscles in the hand. I just want to kind of go over some of those. And then we'll tackle the trunk, the abdomen, and then I'll take off this leg here and we'll talk about the pelvis and the leg and how the muscles work with the pelvis and the leg. And then I'll tell you everything you're going to need to know for your test. That being said, your test. Moving forward, some of the modules now are going to have assignments to make up for lost instructional time. And then some of the modules will have a quiz. Almost all the modules will have a quiz as well. Some modules will have assignments. Other modules will not have assignments, okay? And what I mean by module, it's basically 1 week. The test that I'm going to give, this one especially, is going to have a time limit. So meaning that you're only going to have a certain amount of time to finish each question. That is to prevent you guys from going online and copying and pasting, or having you read through your notes and trying to type out real quick the answers. So if you take a long time on one question, you're not going to be able to finish the whole test because it's roughly going to be about 30 to 45 seconds per question that I'm going to tally up in the whole 25 questions. So you can do the math. It's relatively not going to be 25, 26 minutes long. You're going to have to do it relatively quickly. I might make each question 40, 45 seconds. I haven't decided that yet. I'm going to do some test runs myself once I design the test and put it out. I'm going to hope to have everything done and uploaded for all the modules hopefully within this week or the next week. But just bear with me and we'll get through this together. That being said, I'm going to take a little break and then we'll get started on the lower body lecture. Thanks. Okay, so I believe last time we met we left off on the brachialis muscle. So I have a separate computer up with a list of what we need to go over. And then like I said, we'll talk about what's going to be on your exam. So we left off at the brachialis muscle. Obviously, the brachialis muscle is the prime elbow flexor. And if I bring my model here back, there's my brachialis right here. And remember, the brachialis is what flexes the elbow because it inserts onto the ulna versus the biceps brachii. The main insertion for the biceps brachii is the radial tuberosity. So the biceps brachii does supination. Okay, versus elbow flexion is done by the brachialis muscle. All right, moving on forward, we have on the next test is going to be the last few muscles of the arm, and then we're going to go into the abdomen, the chest wall, and so on and so forth. And I'll tell you what's on the test and what's not on the test. All right, so triceps brachii. Triceps brachii is going to be potentially on your tests for the following week. And the triceps brachii, we all know the triceps because we do tricep extension exercises. Well, the triceps brachii is on the posterior aspect of the humerus. And the triceps brachii meaning tri, that it has 3 heads. So if we remove our deltoid, we can see our triceps brachii. Let me see if I can zoom in here. Okay, can't zoom in. All right, but we can see our triceps brachii through here. Now, what I would recommend is go ahead and use online resources to really delve into what the triceps brachii looks like, because the 3 heads have multiple attachment points. Okay, so what you need to know for the triceps brachii is, remember, origin is always on a more stable surface than the insertion. The insertion is always going to be on a more mobile surface as compared to the origin. So for the triceps brachii, the long head of the triceps brachii, which is this guy right here that goes deep and underneath the rotator cuff musculature, the long head of the triceps brachii originates on the infraglenoid tubercle of the scapula. So for you guys, scapula is fine, but the long head is really the infraglenoid tubercle of the scapula. And then the other aspect with the origin, you can just say is the scapula. But that's infraglenoid tubercle for the long head of the triceps. So if I ask you on a question, what is the origin of the long head of the triceps, then you would say the infraglenoid tubercle. All right, the insertion of all 3 heads of the tricep comes down and inserts onto the ulna. Okay, that's why it is the prime elbow extensor. Okay, it basically extends out our elbow. So if you're doing a tricep extension or an overhead tricep extension, that's what the muscle is performing, is elbow extension. And that's because it inserts right there onto the olecranon fossa. Okay, remember that or excuse me, not the olecranon fossa, the olecranon process. Remember, the olecranon process is the posterior aspect of the elbow. It's that pointy part of our elbow right here, and that's our ulna. All right, so that kind of concludes up with the arm. As far as the lower arm is concerned, the most important thing that you guys need to know is if we supinate and we come over on the anterior aspect, or the supinated aspect, or the ventral aspect of our lower arm, well, then we can make a fist and flex, and right up through here in this area on the medial aspect, this is what we call our flexor wad. Okay, and our flexor wad, let's see if I can take my guy off here. Our flexor wad is made up of several different muscles, and all of these muscles act on the hand, the fingers, and the wrist. Okay, so if I take my flexor wad here, this is my flexor wad. I have my flexor carpi ulnaris, flexor carpi radialis. Okay, my flexor digitorum longus, flexor digitorum profundus, so on and so forth. There's a lot of muscles through here that act on the wrist and the fingers, okay, the digits of the hand. All right, but ideally we like to just call these the flexor wad. It's pretty easy to remember like that. Now, if you're going to be an OT, an occupational therapist, or maybe even a DPT, physical therapist, tends to, when you're doing rehab, it's good to differentiate between all of them. But for all intents and purposes for this class, just know this as the flexor wad. Okay, that contains some of the main flexor muscles of the wrist and the hand. Conversely, on the opposite side, so this is the dorsal aspect of the hand, and now our hand is pronated. And if we take our hand pronated, kind of bend your elbow, make a fist, and then go into wrist extension. You can kind of see there my extensor wad is flexing. So your extensor wad is basically all the way through here. All right, and your extensor wad, just like the flexor wad, has a bunch of muscles that extend the wrist and bring the fingers or the digits up. Okay, so that's the flexor wad as well. You have your extensor digitorum longus, your extensor digitorum brevis, your extensor digitorum profundus, superficialis. There's several muscles. The extensor carpi radialis, extensor carpi ulnaris, so on and so forth. once again, OT school, DPT school, those sorts of career paths, you're going to have to know those in detail. Same with ATs and PAs and so on and so forth, especially if you specialize with the wrist or the hand. This class, just know where the extensor wad is at, and then the flexor wad, okay? And then know the brief muscles of what they're called. We don't have enough time to test you or go into detail with some of those muscles and discuss some of those muscles. Okay, so now let's talk about the thoracic cage. The way I like to discuss the thoracic cage is, first of all, this is the trunk of the tree, right? Our thoracic cage is the trunk of the tree. Our ribs, very, very stable. Okay, our limbs are very mobile. We want them to be mobile. And then our spine, a lot of muscles. Remember when we went all over all the muscles of the upper back? All the muscles tend to originate on the spine, the ones that are on the back and then come outwards. And they either come outwards to the scapula or come outwards down to the pelvis. And they assist with stability and mobility. They play a very important role with stability and mobility with the scapula, the pectoral girdle, and then the pelvis here and the pectoral girdle. Okay, so rib cage, really stable. Our abdominal area or our lumbar area, okay, a lumbar region here in the posterior aspect, is very unstable. Okay, the only thing that's maintaining stability in our lumbar spine area is musculature. Okay, we go from our ribs, all right, and our pelvis, the pelvic bones are really, really stable. And then in between the two, it's just muscle. That's the only thing that's stabilizing the lumbar spine. Hence why 70% of Americans in a given year tend to report out of work because of low back pain, because we sit all day long on our computers and we just lose mobility and stability of our lower body and lose stability of our lumbar area because maybe we're inactive or we're sedentary, and then next thing you know, we start to have lumbar pathologies, okay? So it's really important to understand the concept behind the muscles of the abdominal region and the lumbar region, okay? So I like to explain and teach the muscles of the lumbar region and the abdominal region by using an analogy, a coffee cup. Okay, so we all go to Starbucks, or we all go to, here in town, PCJ, Port City, Java, and we get ourselves a coffee cup. So I like to explain this. Your coffee cup is a real nice hot cup of coffee, okay, or a hot cup of tea, all right? So my abdominal and thoracic and pelvic floor, that is my coffee cup. So I think of my core. So if you're going to go to the gym and work out your core, you're not necessarily going to just go and do abs, right? I'm just not going to do crunches because that's just one aspect of the core. So my coffee cup analogy. The front of my coffee cup is made up of the muscles that everybody wants to show off, right? The rectus abdominis. So the rectus abdominis is this set of muscles right here in the front, but this is actually deep to another set of muscles just outside of it. And this is kind of the side of the coffee cup, all right? So right here, I have my external obliques, and this is a more deep view right here. The external obliques, if we take basically a scapula, or scalpel, excuse me, and start slicing away the fascia and the external oblique musculature, we get the internal obliques. And your internal obliques are a little bit smaller, all right? They kind of come from your pelvic, your iliac crest, and come on up to the inferior aspect of your last rib. Whereas your external obliques, well, the external obliques, same, they start at the iliac crest and kind of come down to the pubic region, and they come all the way up, come across, the fascia comes across to this midline where our rectus abdominis is. Now remember, our rectus abdominis is deep to the external obliques, but the fascia of the external obliques comes across and ties into the other side external obliques and ties into fascia. And this fascia is a mixture of tendinous tissue, musculotendinous tissue. The external obliques then comes on up and attaches onto the ribs themselves. Whereas the internal obliques, they just attach onto the inferior aspect of the last rib and the cartilage of the last rib. Whereas the external obliques, they kind of come up and they tie into the ribs. And then you remember this muscle right here? If we were in class, I'd ask you which muscle that is, but that's the serratus anterior. Okay, remember how I said that that muscle is very, very, very important. Well, the external obliques kind of come in, and the fascia kind of ties in together there as they insert into the ribs of the serratus anterior. So that's the external obliques, and then the internal obliques right here. So our coffee cup, the front, the rectus abdominis, deep to the external obliques. The internal obliques are here. The rectus abdominis is here. Before we go into the action of these movements, let me continue this analogy of the coffee cup because I feel it's very important. So on the posterior aspect of our coffee cup, the back side of the coffee cup, so we talked about the front and the sides. Now the back side, okay, of the human body, this coffee cup, there's a lot of musculature, especially here in the lumbar region, okay? So once we get to this lumbar region here, all of this musculature stabilizes the lumbar region. And there's a bunch of it, okay? The latissimus dorsi is the most superficial aspect, and the latissimus dorsi comes down and fuses into a real thick fibrous tissue. Okay, this thick fibrous tissue here is called the thoracolumbar fascia. And that thoracolumbar fascia is a very, very thick tendinous style tissue. Okay, that thoracolumbar fascia comes in and it attaches on multiple attachment points along the sacrum here, which is the bottom spine bone. All right, so the latissimus dorsi is most superficialis here. Beneath the latissimus dorsi, we have a lot of muscles. And a lot of these muscles, like I said, I'm going to tell you what's on your test, but a lot of these muscles you're not going to need to know for your test. Now, when you get into DPT school, OT school, PA school, anything in the healthcare professions above, you're going to do cadaver studies and you're going to go in depth with these muscles. All right, so deep to the latissimus dorsi, some of the important ones that we need to know are the QL. The QL is right here. It's called the Quadratus Lumborum, okay? And the QL is really, really, really deep. In fact, one of the best ways to see the QL, this is kind of a misinterpretation of the QL, because the QL is so deep, it's behind this thoracolumbar fascia. It's so deep that it's really, we like to consider it a part of the anterior aspect of our abdomen. So if we were to take our abdomen and we were to remove our abdomen, so we remove this guy. Let me make sure I don't cause a collapse. And I get rid of all my organs. So all the organs have been removed out of here. Okay, we still have a little piece of a liver. All right. So this is actually, if I were to get rid of my anterior aspect, get rid of all of the muscles in the front of my coffee cup here, and I look in the back, it's better off to see the Quadratus Lumborum from this view. And the reason why is because the Quadratus Lumborum, which is right here and here, it's very, very deep. It's just below our kidneys. And our kidneys are very, very posterior behind all our other organs. So it's better to describe our kidneys in the posterior aspect of our back, so real deep. So our Quadratus Lumborum is back here, and it originates on our iliac crest on the posterior side, okay? And it's just basically just lateral on either side to a really, really important muscle of our trunk, okay, in our hips. And this is the iliopsoas, all right? And we'll talk more about iliopsoas a little bit later on, but iliopsoas is the prime hip flexor of the femur, so it lifts the femur up, all right? And I really recommend you guys, I'll put a link in for some software that you can kind of click on the muscle and you can see the muscle move, all right? A lot of that software tends to be free online, so I'm going to try and find a good one and put it in for the link so that you guys can really take a look at how that muscle moves the leg, okay? So right back here is the Quadratus Lumborum. Okay, so that's on the posterior aspect, all right, but it's really best seen deep behind all the organs in the abdominal cavity, okay? So that's our Quadratus Lumborum on that posterior side. Here's a kind of a neat view, kind of taken back a little bit. as we're talking about the muscles of the core. It's kind of hard for you to see here. But once again, if you can find some software or you go onto that link that I end up giving you guys, you really get to see, when I take this off, you really get to see how thick this is right here. And this is kind of a cross-sectional view. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this portion off that I took off and show you guys the layers of muscle in between in our core. And this really does a good job of showing you. So you can see here the thickness, right? This outer one is our external obliques. Then this inner one here is our internal obliques. And then this guy right here, we haven't talked about yet. We're going to talk about him in a minute. He's hands down by far one of the most important muscles of the core. Okay? I'll bring that back up here in just a second because I want to talk about that. But, like I said, the muscles of the core, we continue. That coffee cup, the front, rectus abdominis, the sides, external and internal oblique, the back, a lot, right? Thoracolumbar fascia, latissimus dorsi. This is called your serratus posterior inferior. You're not going to need to know that one. There's a bunch of small muscles that run along the spine called your paraspinals and your intraspinal muscles, okay? Right in here, in between our ribs, we have what's called our internal costal muscles, okay? Internal costal muscles and external costal muscles. Here's another good image of that. We take the rib cage and we hold it upside down. Here's our internal costal muscles. They're on the inside as they go in and attach our ribs. All right. So our coffee cup analogy, the back side of it, a lot of muscles. Okay. Our glutes are also part of the coffee cup and are a part of the core, because remember the core, our coffee cup, has a bottom. Well, the bottom of the coffee cup are muscles of the core, and those muscles are the iliopsoas, the muscles of the pelvic floor, okay, the glutes, the external rotators of the hips, all right, and we're going to go over all the external rotators of the hips here in a minute when we talk about the lower body and the lower legs, or the legs, excuse me, and the hip, all right. So, going back to the coffee cup analogy. The most important muscle in our core, right? If I have my coffee cup and it's really, really hot, I need something that surrounds it. We put this on the outside. This is the sleeve, but it protects our hands so we don't get burned. That's the way I like to try and remember this muscle. Although this muscle is the innermost muscle of our core, but it surrounds our entire core. It's kind of like the belt of the human body. It starts at the belly button, the umbilicus, all underneath this, and it's actually right there, okay? This is the front part of it. This is the posterior view of it, but this is the front of the what's called transverse abdominus, okay? And you can see here that this muscle surrounds the human body and goes all the way around to the posterior aspect, and it fuses in to the thoracolumbar fascia, or the underside of the thoracolumbar fascia, and all along here our iliac crest, okay? And that's the transverse abdominis. If you take your belly button, imagine there's a string on the back side of your belly button, just kind of right here, and you pull your belly button to your spinal cord as hard as you can. Go ahead and do that right now. Pull your belly button to your spine as hard as you can. That's activating the transverse abdominis. When we do a plank exercise, ideally we want to pull our belly button to our spine, have a little bit of a what's called posterior pelvic tilt, okay? And then that really gets a good activation of the transverse abdominis, okay? So our coffee cup, core analogy. Anterior, front part, rectus abdominis. Sides, external oblique, internal oblique. Back, latissimus dorsi, thoracolumbar fascia, quadratus lumborum, infraspinals, paraspinals. Then the floor of the coffee cup, iliopsoas, muscles of the pelvic floor, external rotators of the hip. The top of the coffee cup, we didn't talk about that, but that was the diaphragm, okay? And that kind of sits up through here and helps with breathing. So the diaphragm sits right about here, all right? And then the most important muscle of the core, I believe, is the transverse abdominis, okay? So that's that little lecture of the core, all right? The ones you're going to need to know of what muscles affect or act on the core are the rectus abdominis, the external oblique, the internal oblique, okay? Here, superficial, covers this whole area. Internal oblique, not so superficial, it's deep, right there. Rectus abdominis is next to the internal oblique, deep to the external oblique, okay? And then your transverse abdominis, you're going to need to know that. And then the Quadratus Lumborum, okay, seen here on the anterior aspect, and then on the posterior aspect, seen right here, okay? So that is the muscles of the core, or the abdominal wall, or the chest cavity, all right? All right, so let's talk about the pelvic girdle and the leg, and then we'll go through the lower leg, okay? And then afterwards, I'll kind of sum up and look at your sheet and then talk about everything that you're going to need to know for your test. Now, you notice that the initial stuff that we talked about so far today, I haven't really said anything about origin, insertion, and action. Well, that's because I'm not going to test you on origin, insertion, and action of the muscles of the chest wall and the thoracolumbar region and the lumbar region, okay? I just want you to know the names of the muscles, okay? And I'll kind of quickly go back through some of those again when we're summing up everything and we're going over everything. Now, that being said, some of these muscles, you're going to have to know the origin, the insertion, and the action. And I'll kind of tell you very basic on some of them. We don't need to know transverse process, anterior aspects, T12 through L5. I don't want to know some of that. I'll just say transverse process, and that's fine. Kind of like how we did in the upper body portion of this quiz. Now, that being said, when you get to OT school, PT school, PA school, all of that, you're going to have to know that in detail, especially when you do cadaver studies and when you're in the wet lab, because they're gonna get real in detail of origin, insertion, and action. For this, you don't need to know. This is an introductory class. Okay. All right. So let's talk about the pelvic girdle. One of the first ones that I wanted to bring up with the pelvic girdle is the iliopsoas. Like I mentioned earlier, the iliopsoas is right here. It's actually made up of 3 muscles. I wish I had a whiteboard because I would write down these 3 muscles. But I want you to look up iliopsoas on your own. And the 3 muscles are really, really important, and it's important to differentiate these muscles, okay? So it's the psoas major, which is right here, and then we have the psoas minor, which you can't see here. It's a little bit smaller back behind it, okay? And then the iliacus. The iliacus is right here. Remember earlier, way back when we were talking about the appendicular skeleton and we were talking about the pelvic girdle, and I said the iliac and the iliac fossa is a very, very important anatomical location to remember. Well, this is why it's a very important anatomical location, because the iliacus originates off of the iliac fossa. Okay, so if you remember that iliac fossa, it kind of sits like so. That cave-like surface of the iliac fossa is where the iliacus originates from. We combine all 3 of them together. Psoas major, psoas minor, and iliacus. We combine them all 3 together because when they're all together, they form what's called the Iliopsoas Aponeurosis. Okay, so I'm going to try and move this down here. Let's see if it stays. And it sort of stays. Let me move the whole computer. There we go. Okay, so here we see the psoas major, psoas minor's behind it. Okay, the iliacus, and then all 3 of those together come down into what's called the Iliopsoas Aponeurosis, and then attaches onto the femur. Now, where it attaches onto the femur is the lesser trochanter of the femur. What you need to know for the iliopsoas is it originates on the transverse process of the spine. You don't need to tell me which ones. We don't need to go in detail for that. It also originates on the iliac fossa, so transverse process and iliac fossa. Okay? And the insertion is the femur. You don't have to tell me the lesser trochanter of the femur. If you do, great. If not, no big deal. Just the femur's fine. And then the action is hip flexion. Okay, it is the prime hip flexor of the hip. So it is hip flexion of the femur. Okay, acts on the acetabular-femoral joint. Remember, that's the ball and socket joint of the pelvic curl. So that's the iliopsoas. Hello. Okay, I got the chest back on, and I'm also lifting them up. Why? Because we're going to go into detail with some of the other muscles here. All right. So we just talked about the iliopsoas. The iliopsoas is the prime hip flexion. The iliopsoas is deep back behind all the organs. So we got to get rid of all the organs. We have to get rid of the rectus abdominis, the external obliques, the internal obliques, the transverse abdominis, organ C later, and then we can see, just like the QL, the iliopsoas. Okay. So what I want you to denote right now is the next one, rectus femoris. You'll notice that's the next one on your sheet, but this one is actually a part of the quadriceps. So here's our knee joint, okay? And here's our quadriceps. Our quadriceps is a set of 4 muscles. We're only going to be able to see the superficial ones here. So another opportunity for you to click on that other link that I have in this module, the muscles module, so that you can dissect and look at all of the quadriceps, okay? The quadriceps are quad, meaning 4 muscles grouped together, but they're all different muscles. This one right here, the rectus femoris, you'll notice it's up on your sheet with the pelvic girdle. The reason why is because the quadricep, rectus femoris muscle, is the only quadricep muscle that crosses 2 joints. The other quadriceps, here, here, and below this, act on the knee joint only. This rectus femoris muscle comes all the way up and inserts onto the AIIS. If you remember that from 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago at this point now, the AIIS is the anterior inferior iliac spine, okay? That is the origin of the rectus femoris. The insertion is the same as the other quadriceps muscle group. The insertion is the tibial tuberosity via the patellar tendons and quadriceps tendon and patella, okay? But the rectus femoris is grouped together with the pelvic girdle because it acts on the hip joint. It is a hip flexor. Okay, specifically, it does hip flexion with the knee locked out, so knee fully extended, okay? And it does hip flexion from 0 to 30 degrees. After that, the iliopsoas really takes over and kind of does the rest of the movement. But for 0 to 30 degrees of hip flexion, especially with the knee straight, so if you lock out your knee and raise your leg up into the air, that is the rectus femoris performing that movement, especially with the first initial 0 to 30 degrees. Now, we group that once again with the pelvic girdle because it is a hip flexor. Straight leg raise, in other words. So basically you're supine and you're performing a straight leg raise. All right? All right. The gluteus maximus. We just talked about hip flexion. Now let's talk about hip extension. The gluteus maximus. The big guy on the back. The one that everybody wants when they go to the gym, especially for beach season, right? Squats, squats, squats. Let's do as many squats as we can. I don't know why we all go crazy for squats all the time. But anyways, that's the glute max, okay? It's the big boy on the back, all right? The glute max, the origin, all you need to know is, you can kind of just look at it and tell, sacrum, iliac crest, especially the posterior aspect of the iliac crest, ties into the iliotibial band right here, okay? So iliac crest and sacrum, origin, insertion, all the way down to what's called the gluteal tuberosity on the femur. If you just say femur, that's perfect. So, origin, sacrum, iliac crest, insertion, femur, movement or action is hip extension. It brings our leg backwards, okay? It is the prime hip extensor, all right? So that is the gluteus maximus. The gluteus medius and the gluteus minimus are underneath this, okay? So if we remove this, we have the gluteus medius and the gluteus minimus underneath. They kind of go side by side, all right? And they assist in hip extension. Same thing, origin and sacrum, okay? The origin is the sacrum, all right, and the ilium. And then the insertion is the superior femur, all right? The gluteus minimus does a little bit more of external rotation. The gluteus medius does a little bit more of abduction and hip extension. But the gluteus minimus is underneath, right underneath. If we took the maximus off, we have the gluteus medius and the gluteus minimus, okay? And the minimus is right along here, and that does more of that rotational movement, all right? More external rotation, not so much abduction, all right? But the movements, the prime movements of the gluteus medius and the gluteus minimus are hip abduction and external rotation, okay? And it also assists with hip extension. If you just give me one of those, that's fine, all right? Most likely, the gluteus maximus is going to be on your test. The gluteus medius and the minimus may not be, okay? All right, moving on forward to the piriformis. Go ahead and look up the piriformis. I don't have the piriformis here, unfortunately. The piriformis is a muscle that's underneath. So if we took off the gluteus maximus, we would see the gluteus medius and the gluteus minimus. And then just underneath the gluteus minimus is the piriformis, and it kind of sits like that. And the piriformis is one of 6 of our external rotators of our hip. You don't need to know all 6 of those muscles. There's multiple. They're called superior gemellus, inferior gemellus, obturator internus, obturator externus, quadratus femoris, and then the piriformis, all right? All you need to know is the piriformis, okay? And the piriformis performs external rotation. You don't even need to know the origin and the insertion, but it originates on the pelvic girdle and it inserts onto the femur. But for this class, you don't need to know that. Just know that the piriformis is one of 6 external rotators of the femur, and that's the action that it does. All right? And you could look on your resource sheet and get a good picture of that. All right. Go ahead and cross off the pectineus. It's on the front. The pectineus is a real small muscle. I'm not going to test you on the pectineus. If we remove all this, it makes up what's called the floor of the femoral triangle. And the pectineus is not one that I'm going to test you on. All right. The Tfl, Tensor Fascia Latae. Okay, your Tfl is right here in the front. All right, this is your Tfl. A lot of people think of the Tfl being on your side of your hip. No, it's right on the front of your hip, right through here. And this is your Tfl. And the Tfl does 2 movements. It does hip flexion and it assists with hip abduction. It really assists with both of them. It's not a prime mover of either. It's more of a stabilizer, assister muscle. And it kind of starts right here on the superior, anterior superior iliac crest, right next to another muscle called the sartorius. And it comes along the iliac crest, ties into the fascia here of the iliotibial band, and comes all the way down and inserts onto the the IT band, if you've ever foam rolled this, and it comes all the way down through here. Okay, so this is your TFL, the tensor fascia lata. All right, and it performs abduction and hip flexion. Okay, so origin, iliac crest, insertion, iliotibial band or iliotibial tract can also be called that. All right. Now let's talk about the leg. Let's go back to the rectus femoris. Now, the rectus femoris, like I said, is a part of the quadriceps muscle group. If I test you on the rectus, I'm going to test you on the rectus femoris. Let's just be honest. You're going to get a test, and it's going to have the rectus femoris on it. In fact, it's going to have all the quadricep muscles and the hamstring muscles because they're very, very important. Okay? So, the quadricep muscles, Rectus femoris originates on the anterior inferior iliac spine, if you remember that, and then inserts onto the tibial tuberosity. Quadricep muscle right here, not to be confused with this guy. This is the longest muscle in the human body. Right here's a quadricep muscle, goes up underneath, attaches onto the femur. So it originates on the femur, comes down around the rectus femoris. This is called the vastus medialis. And then this muscle comes down, fuses into the quadriceps tendon, and then comes around as well, fuses into this tissue throughout here, all this tendinous tissue, and attaches onto the tibial tuberosity. Okay? The vastus lateralis, so that was the vastus medialis. The vastus lateralis is on the outside here. That's the third quadricep muscle that we've talked about. All right, originates on the femur, comes down, fuses into the musculotendin junction of the quadriceps tendon here. Some of the fibers also kind of come around through here, all right, and join into the joint capsule here of the knee. And then it inserts, onto the tibial tuberosity via the patellar tendon, quadriceps tendon, and so on. Okay, just like all the other quadriceps. All the other quadriceps have the same insertion. They have different origins, but the same insertion. All right. The rectus femoris is the only one that originates onto the pelvis. The other ones originate on the femur. There's specific locations on the femur, but you don't need to know that. Just tell me femur. You don't need to tell me the linea aspera or anything like that. Just tell me the femur, and I'm fine with that as far as the origin is concerned. The fourth quadricep muscle you cannot see on here. We have to remove the rectus femoris, and it's deep to the rectus femoris, and it's called the vastus intermedius. So we have the vastus medialis, vastus lateralis, rectus femoris. Remove that, vastus intermedius just below it. Okay, and the vastus intermedius, origin, femur, insertion, tibial tuberosity. All of the quadriceps, the action is knee extension, kicking a soccer ball. Okay, knee extension. The only one that has two movements is the rectus femoris, hip flexion and knee extension. Okay, so it's an important concept to know. Knee extension for all of them, rectus femoris, hip flexion, and knee extension. Okay, all right, moving on now. Let's talk about, on the posterior aspect of the leg, the hamstring group, and then we'll get into the sartorius. But first, let's talk about the hamstrings. Hamstrings were three, okay? Three hamstrings, all right? Easy to think of lateral to medial, all right? On the lateral aspect, we have this hamstring muscle. It's called our biceps femoris. It's called biceps femoris because it's two heads. So all the hamstrings originate on the same spot, but they insert on different locations. Okay? So, biceps femoris is here, semitendinosus is here, and then underneath the semitendinosus is the semimembranosus. Okay? So right here is our semimembranosus. All right? They all originate on the ischial tuberosity. Remember, that's the butt bone that we sit on. All right? So the ischial tuberosity is the origin. The insertion, biceps femoris insertion, is right here. Okay? The insertion of the biceps femoris is the fibula, and also the fibers kind of go back in through and tie into the fibers of the gastrocnemius, but really just know it's the fibula, and then the posterior aspect of the tibia. Okay, so posterior lateral aspect of the tibia and the fibula. And then your semitendinosus, the insertion, really important, right through here. It comes down and around to the front part of our knee, really, kind of the medial aspect of our knee. And the semitendinosus comes on down and through here, and the insertion is a region called the Pes Anserine, okay? And the Pes Anserine is really, really important. It's a grouping of three muscles. This tendinous tissue here, grouping of three muscles, the Pes Anserine, is the semitendinosus, the gracilis, and the sartorius. And these three muscles, which are not hamstrings, only one of them is hamstring, come together and fuse into the Pes Anserine, or the Pes Anserine aponeurosis. Okay, so this is the Pes Anserine through here. All right. So semitendinosus on top inserts onto the Pes Anserine. Below, the semimembranosus inserts onto the posterior medial aspect, or the posterior aspect of the tibia. Okay. The action for the hamstrings are called a biarticulate muscle, meaning they cross two joints. They act on two joints. They act on the hip joint and they act on the knee joint. Okay, so the biceps femoris, the semitendinosus, and the semimembranosus all originate on the ischial tuberosity, and they cross the knee joint and they insert on various portions here. So that means that they do two movements. They do hip extension, so they help out the big guy with hip extension. And then they do knee flexion, okay? So butt kicks are an example, or heel kicks, okay? So knee flexion, all right? So knee flexion, hip extension. Running involves a lot of the hamstring muscle group, okay? That's why sprinters sometimes strain their hamstrings, or strain their hamstrings. Okay, so once again, let's go back over that. Origin, ischial tuberosity. Biceps femoris, insertion is the lateral aspect of the fibula and the lateral aspect of the posterior tibia. Semitendinosus, insertion is Pes Anserine. Semimembranosus, insertion is posterior tibia. Okay, movement or action, knee flexion, hip extension. You can pretty much guarantee you that I'm going to test you on all four quadriceps and all three hamstrings. Origin, insertion, and action. So study those well. Look at your resource sheets. Click on the link to, it's the resource link that can show you how they move in the human body, so on and so forth. Okay? Now, the last one of this, last grouping of this upper hip area, okay? The sartorius, longest muscle in the human body, starts up here on the anterior superior iliac spine, different from our rectus femoris. So anterior superior iliac spine comes down and around and inserts into the Pes Anserine with the semitendinosus, okay? And this guy does a lot of movements, okay? The acronym for this, for the action of the movements, is FABERS, F-A-B-E-R, F-A-B-E-R, okay? FABERS is flexion of the hip, A-B, abduction of the hip, and then E-R, external rotation of the femur. So it does flexion, abduction, and external rotation of the femur. And that's what the sartorius does as far as movement is concerned. Okay. The next one that I want to talk to you about is your gracilis. Your gracilis is right here. It's a very important muscle that ties into the Pes Anserine. It originates onto the pubic, or originates from the pubic region, inserts into the Pes Anserine, and it does the same movement that the adductors do. They adduct the leg. So the gracilis adducts the leg. It brings it in. It's adding it to the body. Underneath the gracilis are your three adductor muscles. And I'm not going to go too deep into these. There's three of them. Okay, they're below the gracilis. They're called your adductor magnus, adductor brevis, and adductor longus. They're all kind of deep underneath here. Okay, and don't worry about origin, insertion, and action for those. Just, well, the action is the abduction. So that's the easy part of that. Okay. All right. Last little bit. We've talked about all the muscles that are important for you to know on your test for the upper lower leg. Now let's talk about the lower leg. So I'm going to lift this guy up now. And let's see if I can get him nice and close. All right, I'll just kind of hold it up into the air because I'm going to go through this real quick. Right here in the front, This is your anterior tibialis. Know how to locate that one. I'm not going to test you on origin insertion, but it's right here in the front. It originates on the tibia and goes all the way down to the foot and inserts onto multiple aspects onto the feet. You can see that tendon right there. Okay, that is your tibialis anterior. It dorsiflexes the foot, so it lifts the foot up. Really important with running. Okay, dorsiflexes the foot, lifts the foot up. The gastrocnemius is on the back side, and the gastrocnemius does the opposite of dorsiflexion of the foot. It does plantar flexion. Okay, so it basically points your toes downwards. All right, doesn't act on the toes necessarily. It acts on the heel and the foot, the ankle joint, and if you're doing like a calf raise with your knee locked out, that is the gastrocnemius. The origin of the gastrocnemius is the posterior aspect of the femur. Okay, and then the insertion is the Achilles tendon and the calcaneus tuberosity. All right, the soleus and the gastrocnemius work together to do plantar flexion. All right, so the gastrocnemius right here, the two heads, below it is the soleus. The gastrocnemius originates above the knee joint on the femur. The soleus originates just on the tibia. So the gastrocnemius does two movements. It assists with knee flexion and does plantar flexion. The soleus beneath it just does plantar flexion. Okay? And then you can cross off tibialis posterior. I'm not going to test you on that one just because we don't have enough time to go through all these and test you on all these. Okay? So, let's do a little recap. Okay, let's do a little recap. What's important? What's going to be on your test? What do you need to know? All right, so if we look at our sheet, I have my sheet here on my other computer. Let's start from top to bottom. We started with the arm, the leftover of what we had with the arm. Triceps brachii, pretty important, okay? As far as your core musculature, know how to point out your rectus abdominis, external oblique, internal oblique, quadratus lumborum, okay? Quadratus lumborum, very important. All right. Know the muscles of the pelvic girdle. So the muscles of the pelvic girdle that I want you to know are obviously your gluteus maximus. Okay, no origin, insertion, and action for gluteus maximus. Iliopsoas, origin, insertion, and action. Not real technical as far as the origin and the insertion. Know where to locate the adductors. All right, where are the adductors at? Remember, they're on the inside. They adduct the leg. They bring the leg in. Then I want you to know all of the origin, the insertion, the action of your quadriceps, the origin, the insertion, the action of the hamstrings, and then know how to locate the gastrocnemius and the tibialis anterior. Okay. All right, hopefully this was helpful. I'm going to try and get a whiteboard so that as we move forward and we do these lectures online, I'm able to write stuff on the board and kind of go through it. So bear with me. This was the first one. Hopefully we'll be getting better at these, and maybe I can slow down a little bit. Maybe I'm going too fast. If I am, just shoot me an email, let me know. But it is a video. You can go back and see it again and see me talk really fast throughout all of it. All right? So hopefully this was helpful. Use the link for the resources, like I said, to go to that one website. You can also Google, use your online resources. When you take the test, it is for time. I don't want you to use your resources, but obviously this is online, so I can't expect you guys not to. But you're going to be timed, and you have 15 minutes to take the test, okay? So that means you got to move through it relatively quickly. So know your material, study your material, prepare for your material, okay? All right, do the best you guys can. Hope you're all staying safe throughout all this COVID-19 craziness, and I will see you all next week.